There are photographs that capture life, and then there are photographs that capture the soul. In 1891, one image, the still face of a baby lying in eternal calm, did more than preserve a moment. It tore open the veil between life and death, revealing the fragile line where love dares to defy time. It was not merely a picture of loss, but a reflection of everything humanity fears, remembers, and worships within the silence of the grave. The baby's post-mortem photograph of 1891 exists as more than a visual relic of grief. It stands as a haunting portal between life and death, an intersection where time folds into itself and the visible world brushes against the unseen. In an era when photography was still a sacred and mysterious art, each captured image was believed to hold more than likeness. It held presence, essence, and a fragment of the soul. Within this frame, the lifeless child becomes both an image and a symbol, a mirror reflecting the human desire to hold on to what inevitably slips away. The photograph embodies that ancient longing to preserve life beyond its natural limits, turning death into something almost divine. The child, swathed in delicate garments and surrounded by floral offerings, represents purity untouched by the corruption of time, an eternal stillness that contrasts with the transience of human existence. In this way, the photograph transforms mourning into ritual and loss into memory, inviting those who gaze upon it to cross a threshold within themselves. It calls forth the primal recognition that life and death are not opposites, but interwoven states, that love seeks permanence even when faced with the abyss. This confrontation between beauty and decay awakens the depths of the human psyche, stirring emotions that words cannot contain. The silence of the image speaks a universal truth, that every act of remembrance is also an act of resurrection, every photograph a defiance against oblivion. The baby's image becomes a vessel for collective meditation, not on death as an end, but on the invisible continuity that binds all living things to what lies beyond sight. Through this single moment of captured stillness, humanity confronts its oldest fear and its greatest hope, that something eternal flickers even within the shadow of loss. In the year 1891, society stood at a crossroad between industrial advancement and spiritual unease, and within that contradiction lay the collective shadow of the Victorian mind. The era prided itself on order, morality, and progress, yet beneath the polished surface lingered an unspoken fear of decay and mortality. The post-mortem photograph of the baby exposed what the age sought to conceal, the intimate, inescapable presence of death. While factories roared and science advanced, death was wrapped in lace and silence, confined to the private realm of mourning. Yet through the photograph, grief broke through those boundaries, confronting society with its hidden face. The image revealed not only the lifeless child, but the emotional repression of an entire generation that feared to speak openly of suffering. The photograph was both a wound and a mirror, reflecting the cultural psyche that strove to control nature, emotion, and even the end of life itself. It unsettled viewers because it stripped away the illusion of moral and material control, showing that beneath social decorum lay the same primal vulnerability that had haunted humanity for centuries. The ritual of photographing the dead child became a symbolic act of taming death, turning chaos into composition and anguish into art. Yet this attempt at order betrayed a deeper need, the yearning to find meaning where reason fails. The Victorian mind, obsessed with progress, found in this single frozen image a reminder that death is the great equalizer, untouched by science or status. The shock it produced was not rooted in the lifeless face of the infant, but in what that face revealed, that the age of reason could not extinguish the mystery of mortality. The photo became an unconscious confession, exposing the shadow side of civilization, where sentiment and suppression, faith and fear, intertwined in uneasy harmony. The infant captured in the 1891 post-mortem photograph embodies the purest form of innocence, untouched by the world's corruption, and yet it is this very purity that intensifies the tragedy of its stillness. The child becomes a symbol of beginnings interrupted, a fragile emblem of life's most sacred stage, the moment before awareness, before sin, before decay. Within the human psyche, this image awakens the archetypal longing for permanence, for a state of purity that time cannot erode. It confronts the observer with the paradox that innocence, no matter how divine, cannot escape the laws of impermanence. The lifeless child mirrors humanity's desperate struggle to preserve youth, beauty, and unspoiled life, even as these fade inevitably into shadow. In the composition of the photograph, where softness and serenity conceal the horror of absence, one sees the psychological tension between the desire to eternalize and the need to accept. The image draws the viewer into an unspoken initiation, forcing the recognition that death is not merely an interruption, but a transformation. The baby's peaceful face becomes a visual metaphor for this transformation, a reminder that what seems like an end is in truth a silent rebirth into the unseen. The innocence that once lived in flesh now survives in symbol, in memory, in the collective imagination that refuses to let it vanish. The shock this photograph evokes is therefore spiritual, not physical. It unsettles not because of the dead child, but because it disturbs the illusion that life's beginnings are untouched by endings. Through this haunting stillness, humanity is reminded that innocence is eternal only in the realm of the soul. The photograph becomes an icon of the eternal cycle, revealing that purity does not perish. It transforms, shedding the body but not the light it once carried. Beneath the delicate surface of the 1891 post-mortem photograph lies an invisible presence, the mother's silent grief that saturates every detail of the image. Though her face is absent, her spirit is everywhere. In the careful arrangement of the child's garments, in the tender placement of flowers, in the soft lighting that seems to cradle the infant's still form. The photograph, though outwardly serene, is built upon an ocean of sorrow too vast to express in words. For the mother, this ritual of preservation becomes a final act of devotion, an attempt to hold her child within the realm of the living for one more eternal moment. Through the camera's lens, love transforms into art, and art becomes a fragile vessel for mourning. The act of capturing the image is not a gesture of morbidity, but of desperate reverence, an unconscious attempt to bridge the abyss between presence and absence. The mother, unable to accept the silence of her child's absence, transfers her love into the photograph, into something that can be seen, touched, and remembered. This transformation of grief into image reveals the deep human need to make meaning out of loss, to turn unbearable pain into something enduring. Every ribbon, every petal becomes a language of love, a quiet defiance against the void. Yet the image also holds an unspoken truth, that no photograph, however beautiful, can restore what has been lost. It becomes a symbol of the eternal human struggle to preserve what time erases, to animate the inanimate through emotion alone. The viewer senses not only the tragedy of the child, but also the haunting presence of maternal love that refuses to die. The photograph, then, is not just a relic of mourning, but an eternal dialogue between the mother's soul and the silence she cannot escape, a frozen prayer that continues to speak long after her tears have dried. Deep within the human psyche exists a tension that oscillates between the instinct to cling to life and the unconscious pull toward its own dissolution. And this duality reveals itself in the baby's post-mortem photograph of 1891. The act of photographing the dead child is not simply an expression of mourning, but a symbolic gesture of defiance against mortality itself. It captures the paradoxical urge to preserve what has already slipped beyond reach, turning the end into an illusion of continuity. In freezing that moment, the photograph transforms death into something that appears peaceful, eternal, almost sacred. It becomes a vessel for humanity's most ancient desire, the yearning for immortality. Yet beneath that serenity lies the shadow of the death instinct, the awareness that every act of preservation is also an acknowledgement of loss. The photograph serves as both resistance and surrender, embodying the struggle between the will to endure and the acceptance of the inevitable. The baby's calm expression mirrors the stillness that follows the ultimate release, a tranquility that human consciousness fears, yet unconsciously longs for. The image forces the observer into confrontation with this inner conflict. To gaze upon it is to witness the fragile balance between creation and dissolution that governs all existence. The lens, cold and mechanical, becomes the mediator between human emotion and the eternal void, transforming grief into permanence, but also revealing that permanence is an illusion built upon memory. The photograph thus stands as a psychological monument to humanity's contradictory nature, our fear of disappearance entwined with our fascination for it. Through that silent face, one senses the eternal dialogue between the instinct to live and the desire to merge with the stillness beyond life, a dialogue that defines the spiritual architecture of every human soul. The endurance of the baby's post-mortem photograph from 1891 does not rest merely in its historical context, but in its profound ability to speak through symbols that transcend time and culture. The image functions as an archetype within the collective unconscious, awakening something deeply shared in every human being. The confrontation with mortality, the longing for remembrance, and the mysterious continuity that binds generations. Each visual element within the frame carries a symbolic resonance. The still body becomes the vessel of transition, the white fabric evokes purification and spiritual passage, and the surrounding flowers mirror the cycle of decay and renewal. Together they form a language older than words, a visual prayer that whispers of both ending and rebirth. When one gazes upon the photograph, one is not simply observing a dead child, but participating in an ancient ritual of facing the shadow of existence. It calls forth the recognition that death is not a private tragedy, but a universal condition shared by all living souls. The image becomes a mirror that reflects humanity's collective psyche, where the fear of disappearance coexists with the yearning for transcendence. It is as if the photograph gathers countless personal griefs into one timeless expression of the human condition, dissolving the boundary between the individual and the eternal. Through its silent composition, it unites the visible and the invisible, the personal and the cosmic, allowing viewers from any age to encounter their own reflection within its quiet depth. The baby's image thus becomes more than memory. It transforms into a symbol of the shared inner world that connects all people through love, loss, and the search for meaning. It endures because it reminds humanity that behind every private sorrow lies a collective truth. That death is not the end of being, but a passage into the vast, unseen continuity of existence. The baby's post-mortem photograph of 1891 endures not because of its tragedy, but because it speaks to the deepest layers of the human spirit. Within that still frame, life and death no longer stand apart. They blend into a single eternal truth, that love continues where breath ends, that remembrance is a form of resurrection. The image reminds us that every act of grief is also an act of creation, a way to give shape to what cannot be seen. It stands as a mirror of our collective soul, showing that even in silence, beauty can emerge from sorrow, and that in every ending, something sacred survives. What once shocked history now whispers the most intimate truth of existence, that the soul never truly vanishes. It transforms, leaving behind not darkness, but the quiet light of eternal memory.